Okay, Piska Tov, everyone. Good Gemar Tov. And really wonderful to have everybody come on after a long Tanis, 25-hour Tanis, to learn Tublat. Bravo to all of you. We're sponsored by Shalom Fogel, Lina Nishmas Yaakov Zeb Ben Yehuda Aryeh, Rivka Bes Yaakov Yosef, Tziv Yamir Bas Gad, Yosef Ben Siem Ben Yaakov Zeb, and for a great shidduch for Chayat Tzivya Bas Shoshana Gittel. We're also sponsored by Baruch Ian, Lila Nishmas Yaakov Chaim Ben Abba, Esther Bas Yona, Avram Ben Shmuel HaKohen, Lefu Shalema for Liba Bas Anya. We're sponsored by A.B. Spry. We're sponsored for the physical, emotional, and spiritual protection of Yeshua Menachem Mendel Ben Beila Shendel Rivka. We're sponsored by Berish Gesman for Shoshana Bas Adina. She should have Refuah Shalema B'Sei Sheichel Yisrael, and by Mark Frankel, Lila Nishmas, his father, Yisrael Tzvi Ben Chaim Yeshua Falek. Also, Irving Fishbaum has Yortzeit for his wife's father, Elimelech Ben Hersh Leib, and Rabbi Kranz has Yortzeit for his mother, Freda Rivka Bas Baruch. Then Neshama should have a Lichtige Gan Eden.
I have one more for you, if you don't mind, please. My grandfather's Yortzeit was today. Zachariah Ben Shapsai.
Zachariah Ben Shapsai. The Neshama should have an Aliyah. Okay. So, it's brought down in Halacha that there's an Indian to do a little work on the Sukkah tonight to go Mechoyel El Choyel. But that's for people that are not learning. The best thing is to go to learn. Mechoyel El Choyel, what could be better? One of my favorite Matzah Yom Kippur stories is that when Rav Eliashiv was 100 years old and he fasted Yom Kippur, his minig was after Yom Kippur, he had a fleishach meal. So right after Yom Kippur, he had a fleishach meal, and then he sat down to learn. So they brought him a coffee, and he said, "I'm fleishach, besari." So they said, "Zaidi, it's already 6 hours." So right after Yom Kippur, he sat down and he learned straight for 6 hours at the age of 100. So everybody, we have something to look forward to. That's a great story. So now, if you remember, we ended off yesterday's daf by spinning Kal V'Chomers in 3 different directions, trying to ascertain what the din is with a Kohen Gadol who is an Einan. Is he allowed to do the avodah on a private carbon? And what's the din with a regular Kohen if he's allowed to do the avodah as an Einan for a carbon sibur? And we had many different ways to spin the Kal V'Chomer. So therefore the Gemara comes up with the conclusion as we start the top of Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Since we could actually go in 3 different directions, so kol chada v'chada teiku b'duchte. Each one we leave in the simple way that we could understand it. And therefore the Pasuk says a Kohen Gadol could perform the Avodah when he's an Einan. It means always, even a carbon yachid. And also it says that a regular Kohen, a Kohen Hedyot, who is not allowed to do the Avodah as an Einan, that also should be understood absolutely. Even for a carbon sibur, he's not allowed to do it. And the fact that the Torah says that only Tumah Hutra but Sibur, Tumah is only permitted in the community if it's for a carbon sibur, but for a carbon yachid, it's not permitted even for a Kohen Gadol. So we leave everything in its absolute way, since to make any other derivations, you could go in either direction. So now, we have to try to get people to mute themselves. Okay. Tful Yaim Minalan. How do we know that a Tful Yaim? Now, Tful Yaim is somebody that touched the sheretz and went to the mikveh, so he was toivel, but he didn't have Erev Shemesh. He didn't have the setting of the sun. So that's called a Tful Yaim. He's still considered to have a lesser degree of Tumah. And how do we know that if the Tful Yaim does the Avodah, he disqualifies the Avodah? So it says the Gemara, the Tanya, Rab Simai Aimer, Remez l'Tful Yaim, Shem Ovid Chilol Menayin. Where do we find a hint that a Tful Yaim who immersed himself but didn't have nightfall, that if he did the Avodah, he desecrates it? Talmud Leimer, it says, Kedoshim Yiyu V'lo Yechalalu. You should be holy, and then you won't desecrate. Now, that's not needed to tell me that if you're Tameh, you shouldn't do it. Because we already know that. Im Eina Inyan L'Tameh Dimit Nafik V'Inyan Nozru. The pasuk says that you should separate when you're Tameh, so it must be for the next level. Teneyu Inyan L'Tful Yaim. So the Gemara says, well, maybe not. Maybe it's coming to tell you that if somebody has a bald spot, you're not supposed to make a bald spot, or somebody destroyed the roots of his beard, if he does the avodah, he desecrates it. How do you know? That's referring to a Tful Yaim. Says the Gemara, it offers a alternate. Eima Teneyu Inyan L'Kaireach Karcha. If he made a bald spot on his head, or Lamashkis Pa'azakin, or destroyed the root of his beard, that if he does the avodah in such a state, he disqualifies the avodah. Says the Gemara, no. You see, Tful Yaim Di'im Avad B'Misa Minalan. How do we know that a Tful Yaim, if he does the avodah, he gets Misa B'dei Shemayim? How do we know that? Oh, we learn it out from Truma. The Gamar Chilul Metruma. Then is that if a Tful Yaim separates Truma, not separates, if a Tful Yaim eats Truma, he's Chayav Misa. Misa B'dei Shemayim. Misa at the end of heaven. And therefore, we learn out only that who is forbidden to eat Truma. The pasal b'Truma meichel avodah. One who pasals Truma desecrates the avodah. The loy pasal Truma, one who has a bald spot, and one who has roots of his beard are damaged, doesn't disqualify Truma. Loy meichel avodah. So now, the Gemara tells us that there's 3 levels of desecration. A tameh, a Tful Yaim, that's somebody who went to the mikveh but didn't have nightfall. And then there's a Mechusar Kippurim. That means that he went to the mikveh in the night, but he's like a Zav or a Mitzayah that has to bring the carbon the next day. And until he brings the carbon the next day, he also cannot do the Avodah. So the question is, why do we need a source for all 3 of these levels? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. So Amar Rabba, Lama li dekasa rachmana, tameh, u'tful yaim, u'mechusar kippur. Why do we need to write all 3 levels? So the Gemara says, tzrichei, we need it. Dekas rachmana tameh. Oh yeah, tameh disqualifies because it's metameh. It's metameh other things. Tameh shekem metameh. Now, if it would write it b'tvul yoim, let's say it writes it only by the tvul yoim. Mechusar kippurim lo yasim minei. We wouldn't be able to learn Mechusar kippurim from it because the Tfil Yom is not allowed to eat Truma. A Mechusar Kippurim is allowed to eat Truma. It's just not allowed to eat Kachim. But once he went to the mikveh and he's just waiting to bring his carbon the next day, he's allowed to eat Truma. So if it would only say that a Tfil Yom disqualifies the Avaida, we would say only a Tfil Yom because he's not allowed to eat Truma. Because a Tfil Yom is disqualified from Truma. On the other hand, if we would only write it, b'mechusar Kippurim, say it would write that the Mechusar Kippurim, the one that didn't bring his carbon on the 8th day, disqualifies the Avaida. Tfil Yom lo yasim minei. We wouldn't know the Tfil Yom. Why? Because the Tfil Yom is not Mechusar Maisa. He's not lacking an activity. The Tfil Yom becomes automatically eligible when the sun sets. The Mechusar Kippurim has to bring a carbon. So Tfil Yom lo yasim minei, the Tfil Yom wouldn't be able to learn out from him. Shekein Mechusar Maisa. Okay, so says the Gemara, all right, I agree that it wouldn't be enough to write just one. But why does it have to write 3? Let it only write 2, and we'll learn the third one from 2. Mechad lo yasi. It's not enough 1. But teisi chad mitarte. But we shouldn't have to write all 3. We should only have to write 2, and we'll learn out the third one from the 2 that are written. So the Gemara says, oh yeah, let's see. Behei lo lichtav Rachman. Which one should the Torah leave out? Lo lichtav b'mechusar Kippurim. Let it not write the one that's lacking atonement. V'teisei mahanach. Nah, that's obvious. Because Tamei and Tfil Yom is asa b'truma. But Mechusar Kippurim is not asa b'truma. So that you couldn't do. Right? That's obvious. No, because Malahanach, you know why they disqualify the Avodah? She came Psula Mitruma. The Mechusar Kippurim is not possible Truma. Once he has Erev Shemesh the night before, he's allowed to eat Truma. Ella, let the Torah not write it by the Tfil Yom, and learn it out from Tomei and Mechusar Kippurim. The my parchas, what are you going to ask? Ma'alahanach shekein mechusarim ma'isa. Both Tomei and Mechusar Kippurim are mechusarim ma'isa. Right? The Tomei has to go to the mikveh, and Mechusar Kippurim has to bring a carbon. But says the Gemara, but the bottom line though is that you cannot say that you cannot say you cannot say that the Tfil Yom is excuse me. Let the Torah not write. Let it just say Tamei and Mechusar Kippurim. And learn out Tfil Yom from Tamei and Mechusar Kippurim. So you'll say, but I have a percha. What's the percha? The percha is that both Tamei and Mechusar Kippurim need a Maisa. And that's why they disqualify the Avodah, because they need a Maisa. Tfil Yom doesn't need a Maisa. The Tfil Yom happens automatically with Herech Shemesh. The my parchis malana shekein mechusar Maisa. That's not a good percha. Why is it not a good percha? Saif kli shala tumasan. At the end of the day, the tumah of Mechusar Kippurim is a weaker tumah. It's a weaker tumah because it already had the setting of the sun. You see, is allowed to already eat truma, right? And therefore, the Tfil Yom that did not yet have nightfall is still a stronger tumah. So if the weaker tumah of Mechusar Kippurim disqualifies, then full Yom should surely disqualify. Says the Gemara, no, it's not a good argument. Top line of Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Top line, Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Kasavar, he holds, and this is a big chiddush, that Mechusar Kippurim dezav kizav dami. That one who lacks atonement for a zav is somebody who saw 3 issues of gonorrhea. He has to count 7 days. Then he goes to the mikveh, he has nightfall, and the next day he has to bring a carbon. Before he brings the carbon, he has a din of a zav in regard to kachim. That's a big chiddush. In other words, although he's allowed to eat truma, but vis-a-vis kachim, he still has a din of a full-fledged zav, and which would mean that if he would enter, if he would eat kachim, he would get karas. So therefore, then you wouldn't be able to say that the Mechusar Kippurim truma is a lighter truma. However, this halacha, that a Mechusar Kippurim dezav is kizav dami, that's a very big chiddush, because, you're saying that although in regard to truma, he's allowed to eat truma, and he already have shemesh, he's allowed to eat truma, but in regard to kachim, he still has a din like a zav. He still would have a din of an avatuma in regard to kachim, and if he ate kachim in his state, it would be an isakaris. So this is not a universal, this is a big chiddush, and it's a universal question.
This implies a tremendous level of erudition and understanding of Yiddishkeit and the logic, Torah logic, to say such things. You're expecting a person to be learned and knowledgeable about the mechanisms of the way we think.
In those days,
which is a good thing.
In those days,
I'm saying it's interesting
when we lived with Tumah V'Tara regularly, we were well versed in Tumah V'Tara. Remember, this is an Isser Karas. To enter into the mikdash while you're tummy is an Isser Karas. To eat kachim while you're tummy is an Isser Karas. We're talking about Isser Karas. That's like sleeping with a sister. It's a really serious crime.
It requires a society much more geared towards Yiddishkeit, what you're trying to do, by the way.
A society that's very geared to Tumah V'Tara. Correct.
Even
Now,
today's age, right?
we don't have that today because we don't have it.
Ideas of it are good for general logic. Don't you think, in general Yiddishkeit understanding?
Well, yeah, but the society is not very versed in this because we don't. Now, says the Gemara, "Umechusar Kippurim dezav kizav dami tanoihi." It's a machlokes tanoim. It's a machlokes between different tanoim. The Tanya. Here we're going to talk about the paraduma, the red cow. What's the din? Sarfa einain umechusar Kippurim kisheir. If an einain, somebody who lost a close relative, or one who is lacking atonement, meaning, like our case, that he went to the mikveh already, he had nightfall on the 7th day, but he didn't bring his carbon, ksheira. Both of these people are allowed to burn the paraduma. In the ritual of the paraduma, the red cow, they're allowed to burn the paraduma. Now, remember, an onain is forbidden to do an avodah that was done in the Beis Mikdash. The burning of the paraduma, nothing was done on the Mizbeach, and therefore an onain is not restricted from doing the ritual of the paraduma. However, Yosef HaBavli, Einin Kisheira, the Einin is allowed to do it, but Mechusar Kippurim, Pesula. the Mechusar Kippurim is possible. Now, my lav, v'hakam ifligi. Mar savar Mechusar Kippurim dezav kizav dami. That when he's a Mechusar Kippurim of Gonorrhea, so in regard to Kachim, he is still considered like a Zav. And therefore, a Zav, one who is a full-fledged Zav, is of course not allowed to burn Paraduma. Omar Savar, and the other one holds that he's Lav Kizav Dami. And he has a very weak Tumah, because he already had hair of Shemesh, and he's allowed to burn it. Says Gemara Loi. That's not the Machlokes. The Kuli Alma Kizav Dami. Everybody holds that Mechutzi Kippurim Dezav has a din of a Zav. V'hacha b'hakam ifligi. And they argue as follows. Dichsiv, V'hiza HaTahar. Now, this is a superfluous statement, V'hiza HaTahar. Because the Pasuk already says that the ritual of the Paraduma should be done with the Kayin that's tar. Then it repeats V'hiza HaTahar with spraying the ash of the red cow, which is used to purify one who has corpse contamination. So why does it again repeat Hatar? It's coming to say that he's tar from a previous Tumah. In other words, he's still not fully tar. Michlal Shu Tameh. He's on his way to becoming tar, but he's fully not tar yet. Li made al tful yaim. This comes to teach us that somebody who is a tful yaim, who touched the sheretz, but didn't have yet the setting of the sun, shekasher bit para. Now, okay, the question is, so that means if somebody actually, the tful yaim that this pasuk is talking about is somebody that had corpse contamination. And he went to the mikveh, and it's telling us that after he goes to the mikveh, he could burn the paradum. Question is, when it says that a tful yom could do it, is it talking about any tful yom? Ma'asava tumah de kol ha'torah kula, even a tful yom of a zav. So that the seventh day after he already went to the mikveh, he could do the burning of the paratuma. Umar Savar, no, Tumah da'ach parsha. Only the Tumah of the talking about in that parsha. There it was talking about corpse contamination. Hilkach, take out the word and that's a mistake. Hilkach, Tful Yom, the Tamei Sheretz, a Tful Yom of sheretz, which is much less than corpse contamination. Corpse contamination is 7 days, while sheretz is only 1 day. So a tful yaim who went to the mikveh after sheretz, the kilei, that's even more lenient than a tful yaim of corpse contamination. Also, bekal v'chaim tful yaim the mace. So he would have allowed to be burned at paraduma. Aval mechusar kippurim the zav, the chamer. Now, why is a zav more stringent than a mace? A mace is tummy for 7 days. It's matame 7 days, and zav is 7 days. But by a mace, the tumah didn't come from your body. The zav, the issue of gonorrhea, comes from the body. So that's considered a more severe tumah. So,
But from the body is more severe than the corpse?
Yes, because it's from your own body. So it's closer to home.
You can call it gonorrhea, but it's more of a spiritual release.
I call it biblical gonorrhea. It's as close as we can. It's not actual gonorrhea.
Spiritual mission, right? Just like the tzaras is a mission.
It's a thick type of a mission, which they have to rule if it's considered ziva. We're going to learn about that in a different Masechta, Masechtas Nida. So, Chusar Kippurim Dezav, the Chamer, Shekein Tumah Yatzal of Megufay, Loi. There, we would not be able to learn, and therefore he would not be able to burn the Parah Adumah. Now, we move on to the next subject, and before we do, again, it's really, really special that we have already 26 Zoomers. Well, now I see 25. We had 26, but and 3 people here in Shul. So I want to welcome in Saba and Rabbi Yaakov Warman, Yisrael Fisher, Irving Fishbaum, Menachem Yemansky, Michal, Dr. Guy, Yitzi Muller, Shimon Klein, Barry Cement, Yitzi Fuchs, Dr. Block, Mel Zachter, Nachman Chapler, Rabbi Kranz, Moshe Lehman, Elia Yaffe, Stephen Holtzman, Shelley Zeitlin, Ilya Schutman, Yeshua Shmuel Eisenberg, Chaim Braun, Danny Vogel, David Helfgott, and we have somebody in the back there. You can come in if you're not coming for this year. Oh, okay. It's okay. My home is your home. Here in the shul we have Barish Kesselman, Michal Avram Chavin, Ruvain Chanet. As we learn after Yom Kippur, what a schus. I remember years ago in Borough Park, I used to have sometimes Motzi Yom Kippur 200 people by the year. 200 people. Because it was the place to come. It wasn't easy to get a share on Yom Kippur.
And people valued it much higher, because it's the most worthy thing to be doing.
It could be better after a fast.
I'm saying it's the most worthy thing to be doing.
You don't want to take after a fast. You don't want to take a plunge. You know.
Take a plunge in the Torah.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I'm saying, you don't want to. You finish a whole 25 hours of learning, and then you open up a television. What do you
You'll never open up a television.
Okay, so says the Gemara, we learned Mechusar Begadim, that if one is, somebody is not muted, I got it, okay, Mechusar Begadim, if one is missing one of his vestments, the Kohen Hedyot used 4 vestments, the Kohen Gadol used 8, if he was missing it, he disqualifies the Avodah. So the Gemara says, Minalan, how do we know that you disqualify the Avodah if you're missing one of your clothing? Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mata b'mishmei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and he had it in the name of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. The Amakra, it says, V'chagarta oisam avneit, you should gird them with a belt, Aaron ubanav, V'chavashta lehem migbois, and put upon them hats, V'hoisa lehem kuhuna, and then they will have their priesthood, L'chukas olam, for an everlasting statute. The only time they are in their priesthood is when they're dressed. Bizman, shebigdeim aleim, kuhunasim aleim. They are in their priesthood. Ein bigdeim aleim, if they don't have their vestments, ein kuhunasim aleim. So here we have the first source. We're going to have many sources for this. Here we have the first source that they could only do their ministry when they're wearing the big day kuna.
What about Shechita?
What?
What about Shechita?
No, Shechita is not an Avodah. Shechita is a kosher with Yisrael.
Right, so then it's not a problem if he does it without a bigot.
But pashtus.
Okay.
Pashtus.
Can you say in this instance clothes make the man?
Yes. The pasuk says that they wear lechavod u'lesefaras, for honor and splendor. Now, says the Gemara, is this the source? Nafka? We learned this from elsewhere. The Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, switching over to another subject. Minayin l'sishuya yayin. How do you know that if somebody drank wine, Shem avad chilel, that if he does the avodah, he desecrates the avodah? Talmud Leimer, it says in the pasuk, Yayin v'shecher al teisht, wine and strong beverage you should not drink. And the pasuk goes on to say, Yayin v'shecher al teisht, Ata v'nech itach b'vayachem el oil mayid, v'loy samusu, chukas oilam l'dayrai seichem, u'lahavdo ben ha-kodesh u'ben ha-chol. And to distinguish between the holy and chol. Chol means chulin, profaned. So we see that if you don't avoid the wine, it becomes profane. Now, that's shsuya yayin. In that class is also that we disqualify the avodah with one who didn't wash their hands and feet from the kir, and one who is missing the bigdei kuna. So the Gemara now proceeds. How do we know if he's lacking the vestments or he didn't sanctify his hands and his feet, that he also disqualifies the avodah? Talmud Leimer chuka chuka l'gzeirishav. It says by Shisuya Yayin chuka sayla, and it says by Mechusa Begadim Kahuna l'chukas aylam, and also by Rechitzas Yad V'Regel it says V'Yisalam l'chukas aylam. So we just have a problem here. We just had a second verse. Before we said it's because it says that you should gird them with the avnate and the hat, and then they will be in their state of kahuna. But now we're learning it out of Gzeirah Shava Chuka from Shisuya Yayin. So we have two verses. Why do we need two verses for the same thing? And now we're just going to pause a minute, Rabbi Isai, to change the tape.